Hello everyone. Today I want to show a game played between Magnus Carlsen and Li Chao. This was played in 2015 in the Qatar Masters. Let's check out the game. It starts with d4 and knight f6, c4, g6 and f3. And we have d5. So the Grünfeld is on the board. C takes and knight takes and e4, and the knight settles on b6. Knight to c3, bishop to g7, bishop to e3, and castles. All typical developing moves. Queen d2, a knight to c6, so opting not to go with a c5 hit directly because that can just be captured and it would dislodge the b6 knight. And white castles queenside. So now we have opposite sides castling, so the play can be quite sharp. Pawn storms on both sides. That's a typical idea when you have opposite side castles. f5. It's a bit risky, but right now the light square bishop can't come to c4 to harass the black king because the b6 knight is guarding that square. So for the moment it's okay, and the idea is that black would want to develop the c8 bishop with tempo, but e5 simply blunting the g7 bishop and not allowing black to develop with tempo. And knight b4, while it on its own it doesn't make sense because the a2 pawn is defended, but there is some idea to gain some more control over the d5. That's one idea, and we'll also see the next move which will make it more apparent. Knight h3, looking at g5 and f4, one of those squares, and queen e8. This was a new idea black came up with, and now knight b4 is a little makes a little sense that the idea is to transfer the queen on f7 and then look at the queen side where the white king is sitting. A5 was a typically a known move, and then perhaps and now even knight a4 to exchange the c3 knight, or perhaps activate the queen that way. Those ideas are also there. And king b1. Carlsen just makes a prophylactic move to secures a2 and now a5. Because if after king b1 it doesn't work, that queen f7 that doesn't work because knight g5 comes with tempo and there isn't anything else, and of course knight into a2 is no longer check as it was when the king was on c1. That's one more thing. Now the thing is, white would like to move the h3 knight maybe to f4 and start with h4 and h5, but if the knight goes to f4 now, then g5 can be quite nice because h5 is covered by the black queen, and the knight will have to move from f4, and then with the pawn already on g5, black could push f4 and gain some space. That could be one idea. So perhaps this is a time for little slight improvements in the position for both sides actually. So we have bishop b2 just developing, and c6. Rook to c1 and king h8, just a nice prophylactic move, getting out of the open diagonal. Now king to a1, and this is interesting now. Carlsen makes a very similar move, and here one thing to note is that there is a pawn on g6, and ultimately when h4 and h5 do come, the pawn will have something to bite on. But for white there is no pawn on b3, so when the a pawn is pushed down to a4, it will not have a target, and this means that the white king is a bit more secure on a1 than the black king is on h8. So king h8 is actually not totally sound. Bishop e6 comes finally, just developing, and knight f4 challenging the bishop. Now suppose king a1 were not played, and initially if the knight had gone to knight g5 would have been a move to challenge the bishop, and then h4 h5 would have been possible. But knight g5 in this case is not as strong because of knight c4, which hits the queen and also targets the e3 bishop. So for instance, yeah, that's also one facet of king to h8 and king a1. So after knight f4 we have queen f7 defending the bishop and h4, and now we'll see the h5 pawn, the h4 h5 advance threatening king safety for black. Bishop into a2, grabbing that pawn which was attacked. A decent alternative could have been rook f to d8, putting some pressure on d4, perhaps threatening even c5. And here the line could go knight to h3, looking at knight to g5, h5 by black, preventing h5, and then g4. The attack could go on in that sense. Or maybe after rook fd8, a capture, queen captures, and then f4, solidifying the center, and h5 by black. This could also be possible. And the point being that f4 is necessary to prevent g5, because if straight up h5, then g5 is a response. That's also possible. And of course the e pawn is also threatened in case, because d4 is pinned up and down. The bishop into e5 is also a threat. So at anyway, h4 was played and h5. Sorry, h4, bishop into a2, and h5 by white. King g8. So this is actually interesting that black is admitting a mistake, that it was not very good to go on h8 because the rook is already there on h1 and a pawn storm is coming. But black has gained one pawn. That's something to note. So h into g6, h into g6, a simple trade, softening the black king side. g4 and bishop b3. The direct a4 is not very convincing because of g into f5, and if you go after a3, then b3 is a response. So that counterattack is not so good immediately. So bishop b after g4, bishop b3 is essential to prevent any b3, and then a4 and a3 will come. And here Magnus played bishop to d1. He's clearing the path for the queen to come to h2, and also challenging the bishop on b3. a4 defends the bishop, which defends it again rather, and also prevents a pawn storm to open up some lines to the white king. And queen h2. That was the idea. Rook fd8, creating some room for the black king to move. Queen h7 check, and king to f8. And here Magnus plays d5. He's threatening e6, which would hit the queen, and he's also opened it an attack on the b6 knight. An alternative there could have been g into f5 here, which also is quite winning, but it's not simple at all. And after g into f5, bishop into b3, a into b3, and king b1. This also seems risky to open your king like that, but the line would continue that if black were to double up, white's attack is actually faster here. So, but it's not simple at all. And So, but d5 was played anyway. Threatening, the threat is e6. And knight to c4, which threatens a3, and it makes a3 very significant because it the knight on c4 is attacking b2 as well. So a3 and a into b2 are going to be a very strong threat. But here Magnus Carlsen calculates absolutely perfectly. Now there are two moves. You want to play e6 but not immediately. It's essential that you play knight into g6 first and push the king to e8 and then play e6. And this will be apparent. What happens is that if you were to play e6 first, then a3 comes the response, and we are not capturing the queen with check. And that's the difference. Once we force the king on e8, then we are threatening. Once we force the king on e8, then e6 comes, we are threatening to capture the queen with check, and this makes all the difference. Now a3, giving up the queen is not enough because e into f7 check, king to d7, king is running away, but we have to keep in mind that white has to play with check. There isn't any time to lose because a into b2 is very strong. There's already a rook on a8 and rook to a1 will come next. Knight e5, another excellent move. The point is to allow the white queen to come to f5 and deliver check, so it's fine. We are going to give up the knight, either by the bishop will capture or the knight on c4 will capture, which nullifies the a into b2 threat. So over here, bishop into e5 was played, and now queen into f5 check. White is playing only with checks now. King c7, and a wonderful move we see. First we had black sacrifice the queen, and now it's white's turn. And the point is, we're not just grabbing back a piece, but we are dislodging the c4 knight from its crucial role. So we've overloaded the knight. Knight into e5 is essential, and now we capture bishop into b3. So white is doing quite well now, even though black will win an exchange now, because after a into b2 check and king into b2, there is knight bg3. There are two knights controlling the g3 square. King b1, knight into c1, rook into c1, and king c8. If knight into f7 were played, then simply d into c6 opens the attack on a knight, and the king is also quite loose. So king into c8 was played, d into c6, b into c6, and f4. Here we can see that white has two bishops and a pawn on f7, no doubt, no less, in exchange for a rook for black. The advantage is quite strong, and Magnus Carlsen, of course, is an expert in grinding out technical wins, and it was here that black resigned. So this game is quite interesting, that we saw both players trying to give up the queen for a coordinated attack towards the king, and ultimately that's what chess is all about, a queen for a king. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon for the next game.